Hey, this is First Alert Chief Meteorologist Steve Bailon. Guess what? You made it. You made it to the halfway point of the winter of 2025 and 2026. And it's been a bumpy ride, hasn't it? We've had these streaks of warmer than normal weather and then much colder than normal weather with bouts of snow. And now you're probably wondering, what is going to happen the rest of the way? Well, this is a good time for our First Alert weather team to break down this season in our First Alert Winter Halftime Report. Hopefully that resonates with all you Packer fans out there. We're going to talk more about this winter season, why things have happened the way they have, and what is going to happen moving forward for the rest of the season and beyond. And we have got you covered for the next half hour on all the WBAY platforms on really diving deep into this winter season. So stay with us, and we're going to go check it out over at the weather desk. Come with me. One of the most noticeable things that's happened this winter is that our temperatures have either been way above average or way below average. Case in point, this is a calendar looking at the high temperatures we had in December. Remember how it snowed around Thanksgiving? Well, that propelled us into a colder than normal stretch. The first 15 days of December, our high temperatures were below average. But then the weather teeter-totter flipped, and 12 of the next 13 days were warmer than normal. Remember how warm it was on Christmas Day? We had a high of 35 degrees. If you look at the highs, the lows, and all the temperatures in between, our December average temperature in Green Bay was 19 degrees, right on the button, 5.5 degrees colder than normal. December was cold and warm at times. January also had some flip-flopping with the temperatures. After a cold start, we went into a streak of 12 out of 14 days where our temperatures were above average. And then the weather teeter-totter flipped again. And you remember how cold it was towards the end of January. For 13 out of 14 days, our temperatures were below average. That included some sub-zero high temperatures on January 23rd and January 24th. And at times, our wind chills were down in the 40s below zero. If you look at the entire month of January, our average temperature, the highs, the lows, and everything in between, 15.1 degrees. And that's 3.2 degrees colder than normal. So far, this winter has been colder than normal, despite some warm streaks. Now, let's talk about snowfall, including the snow we had through the weekend. Our seasonal total here in Green Bay is up to 31.2 inches. Would you believe that is exactly to the 10th of an inch normal through this point in the season? So we're on par for a seasonable snowfall, right, at which should be average, 55.6 inches. Now, will it end up exactly there? Well, time will tell. I suspect that it might be a little bit above that, but so far we're pacing normal through this point in winter. Now, while Green Bay's seasonal snowfall has been average, it hasn't been that way across the entire state. For example, Wausau's total of 30.3 inches is below average through this point in winter. Meanwhile, both Milwaukee and Madison have above normal snowfall totals. So you could say that it's been snowier than average so far this season across southern Wisconsin. And as we get to this point in the winter, you probably have noticed that we're increasing the amount of daylight. Yeah, the sunrise is getting earlier in the day. The sunset is getting later in the day. We're gaining about 2.5 minutes of daylight each day through the beginning of February. And now, as of Saturday, our sunset is 5 o'clock and later. In fact, this evening our sunset was at 5:03. For a lot of folks who don't like winter weather, this is our literal light at the end of the tunnel.
Meteorological winter began on December 1st, so we're pretty much 2 months into meteorological winter. What we're going to do here is take a look back at how things have gone so far and compare that to the 6 years that are closest to it in Green Bay's climate record. So for temperature and for snowfall, I'll take what we are currently doing this winter and compare that to the 3 winters that were just slightly colder in the climate record, or slightly warmer, slightly more snow, slightly less snow. And just for perspective here, There are 139 years in the Green Bay climate record, so we have 139 winters to compare this to. So let's start with snowfall. As of the 28th of January, 25.5 inches fell. That is the 45th snowiest winter on record, and comparing that to the 30-year average, last 100 years, the all-time average, we're about 4 inches more than the 100 of the all-time average, but the last 30 years have been a little snowier, and so we're a little under that. And just again, as a kind of an FYI, the most snow we've ever seen in that period was from the 1888-89 winter, 55.3 inches, and 1943-44. We only had 3 inches of snow in that time frame. So again, 45th snowiest, so we'll be looking at the number 42 through number 48 snowiest winters. That's our comparison point here to see how the next 2 months finish. So we're taking a look back at December and January and then seeing how things went in February and in March. And when we do that comparison, there actually is a little bit of correlation here that the winters that have started off on the snowier side like we did this winter have actually finished with less snow than average. So if history is any gauge, we're likely going to see less snow in February or January if that's all we're looking at here. The years that we're looking at that were closest and how they finished, the least amount of snow we had was from 1999, 9.6 inches fell in March and in February, and in 1936 it was 25.9 inches. That's the high end of what we have done historically with winters that were very similar to where this one rates out in snowfall. There's been one of those years, of course, that would be the 1936 with the 25.6 inches, where we actually did finish that part 36 snowiest out of 139 years. But the other 5 years that we're comparing to finished 81 through 124. 70 is your halfway point, so they were all less snowy than the average there. So we'll see how things shake out for the rest of this winter. But again, if history is a guide here, we're likely trending lower on the snow for the rest of this winter and into March and April compared to the start of winter. So it likely gets a little drier as things go on. Now, when we're looking at the temperature, I chose mean temperature. This is your high temperature and low temperature average together, and no surprise here at 17.5 inches. That rates out as one of the colder starts to a winter season, number 22 coldest, and below those averages, 2 to 4 degrees below, depending on the metric. The warmest winter for a mean temperature for December, January, 1931-32. 30 degrees was that mean temperature, so that's your high and your low combined together, so a very mild one there. 1976-77. 6.3 degrees, so yeah, we're on the lower end of the scale, but certainly nowhere near that. Now, when you're looking at the temperatures for the second half of that winter season, those winter seasons that were closest, there really isn't a tight correlation. It rates out slightly cooler than average. 3 of the years were a little bit cooler than the start, and 3 were a little bit warmer, so there's no real clear sign as to which way we would head temperature-wise. 1956 was one of those similar years. The average temperature for the February and March time frame there, 20.5 degrees, 28.4, so that kind of gives you a guide of where we'll end up in between those two numbers, but there really isn't a clear sign, so equal chances that we would go warmer or colder compared to normal, but definitely looking less snowy if history is any indicator.
Now I'm here with James Anderson, the Deputy Director of Green Bay's Parks, Recreation, and Forestry Department. We all know that in Wisconsin and in the Midwest in general, our lives don't stop in the winter. There's so many activities, and that's where you come in.
Yeah, I mean, one of the main things you have to do in the winter, of course, is not just be inside and stay dormant, and you don't want to get those winter blues. So you want to get out and still experience, what's going on with winter recreation. Actually, winter recreation was one of our focuses for a long time. That's why we started to do some of the things we did at some of our facilities to try to get more people outside and more people enjoying the outdoors, even in the winter season.
Yeah, and so what type of activities do you have for the community?
Well, I'm excited because this is the halftime report, so I feel like we're going into third and fourth quarter. So we might have started a little not as great, but we're going to finish really strong. So we're going to officially open up Triangle Hill tubing area. So you can go up there now on Friday nights, Saturdays and Sundays, and rent a tube. We have concessions up there, and we have all our lanes groomed. to go tubing and actually have so we have a magic carpet that actually brings you back up the tubes. You don't have to walk back up the hill. You can get back in line and go back down the hill, and it's really exciting to have that officially open. We also have our ice rinks. We know we've had no shortage of cold weather, so we've got a really good base for our ice rinks. We have 4 or 5 different locations where you can go, and we have hockey rinks, and we have like auxiliary ice rinks. So if you're a hockey player, you can go play hockey with the nets and the boards, and then you can also go and just skate on the auxiliary rink if you just like to, figure skate, I guess.
Yeah, and you mentioned how you're just now finally opening up Triangle Hill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is this later than normal?
I would say it's later than we wanted to. We actually got snowmaking equipment. We ran into a few, things when we were trying to build the infrastructure to get the water up to the top of the hill, and get the snow cannons all in the infrastructure working properly. So we made sure we could do it safely and do it efficiently. So now we actually have that all figured out, and we're just really excited to open up the hill.
Yeah, and so with snowmaking and having to have those right conditions, what's the type of winter that you're hoping for? Are you hoping for more snow, less snow, colder, warmer? What are you hoping for?
Well, it's really unique because so we've we're learning throughout this process as well, right? Snowmaking is actually quite a science. The right temperatures, the right humidity in the air, all those things like really factor into what kind of quality snow you could make. And then natural snow is different than the snow we make a little bit. So you can't necessarily make snow while it's snowing, and then that snow has to but we do have a groomer to kind of groom all this and kind of make sure it's blended together and safe and all that. But yeah, we've learned a lot throughout the process of making snow. So it is a little unique, and yeah, we'd love ideal conditions, in the, let's say, 10 to 20 degrees with the perfect humidity so we can make a really good snow base. That's one thing about Triangle. We do need to build like a pretty solid base. So, hopefully it'll last longer now and stuff and go throughout the season longer. But with the natural snow and not with the ability yet to make snow while we were kind of building our infrastructure, we didn't get a lot of natural snow. So we couldn't open up Triangle earlier because we just didn't get a lot of snow. Or when we did get snow, then it would warm up and it would melt and then it would become ice, and then it was just kind of this back and forth. Now we're kind of looking ahead, like I said, to the 3rd and 4th quarter, finishing strong here. We have a really solid base. We have all the lanes groomed. We're really excited about how the next month or two are going to be here.
Yeah, for sure. And you had also mentioned ice rinks, hockey rinks, all of those things. Were they able to open on time this year, or was it still that struggle with that lack of moisture?
So I would say ice is a little bit different. I mean, we look for those, really cold temperatures if we can. I mean, we actually had too cold of temperatures to the point of, so we still make ice with our park crews. I mean, they still go out there and we still make natural ice. We keep going a thin layer of ice at a time to build up a good structure and make it really smooth. And if it's too cold, it actually freezes too fast and kind of creates little waves, and it's not as smooth. So you don't want it like extremely cold like we've had this last week where it was like -20 or whatever. You don't want that, and plus it's not necessarily safe for our staff to be out there during those conditions. But yeah, when it's the weather temperature is like -10 to +10 in there, usually in the early mornings especially, we make some really good sheets of ice. Took us a little longer. We had those remember those thaws we kind of had where it was like, why are we experiencing 40-degree weather at the beginning of January? That kind of crushed all of our ice that we had made prior to that. But now we have a really good base, and it should be good as long as we, once you get into February, you start getting that high sun again, and it starts to kind of warm up a little bit, so they don't last quite as long. But looking at the forecast, we should have them for at least a good season here yet.
Yeah, and kind of wrapping us up, as you said, we're going into the 3rd and 4th quarter. What is your ideal, how the rest of this season would play out? Are you hoping for more snow? Are you hoping for colder? What are your thoughts?
Well, I choose to live in Wisconsin, so I mean, if it's going to be winter, let's actually get some more snow out there, because we traditionally do some fat tire bike trails in the winter for winter use. We do cross-country ski trails in the winter, and we really haven't been able to do those. I don't think anybody around the area has been able to do those very well with the natural snow we've gotten and the temperatures that we've gotten. So I'd actually like to see maybe a little more snow to get those trails up and running, because then we'd have a really good, we'd have the Triangle Hill tubing, we'd have, the skating rinks and the hockey rinks, we'd have cross-country skiing and fat tire biking, and kind of have a whole, like, you know, a lot of choices for people to get outside and really enjoy the outdoors in the winter, because I think it's really important for people to still recreate, activate, you know, the parks outside.
Yeah, and that's definitely one of my favorite things about the Midwest, you know, the fact that life doesn't stop in the winter. There's still plenty of fun activities, and it sounds like you guys are working really hard to get all those activities out there to the community. So thank you so much for coming in and talking to me. I wish you the coldest, snowiest rest of the winter.
Maybe
for
not
you
too
guys.
cold, but just the right, you know, like 0 to 20 in there, and, you know, sunny and nice, you know, but no wind. That'd be great.
We'll see what we can do.
Yeah.
We'll stay warm out there.
The old classification of warnings that we've seen for winter events has been quite vague in terms of its description. Wind chill watch and warning, wind chill advisory. It does describe, yes, the wind chill is going to be low, but not everyone at first glance is going to know what that means. Wind chill to them may mean something completely different if they've not seen any weather terms before. Hard freeze warning and hard freeze watch were some old terms as well. Now, there could be a light freeze at times, like frost bordering on freeze in those low 30s, upper 20s zones. That could actually be some of those plant killer frosts, for example. A little bit of a hard freeze that'll end the growing season, for instance. So in 2024, and most recently, we've actually seen these deploy just recently. The extreme cold watch, at which we had some 30, 40 below wind chill values at least 24 hours before they occurred. In fact, they issued almost 2 days ahead. And the extreme cold warning in the really dark blue, in fact, it's actually a darker blue than what I'm showing you there. It's just going to show up a lot better on full than it is on this screen. And the light blue is the cold weather advisory. Now, the extreme cold warning begins at minus 30-degree wind chills in our area. These are tailored to the National Weather Service offices, for example. So it's, for instance, the deep south I've seen recently where Florida is getting some 8-degree wind chill values, but really that's their extreme cold warning criteria. And once we get into that cold weather advisory area, it's a little bit closer up to the 0 point. But for us, it starts at 20 below 0. And once we get back to the freeze watch, you see that starts mainly in the growing season. You're going to really see that up until the end of growing season for crops. Once we get below 32 degrees for a sustained period of time, usually at least 8 hours during the nighttime hours, that's when we'll see that freeze warning. And for us, that is the last time you'll likely see it heading into the later part of the year. So that's really going to seek to emphasize that cold weather is dangerous with or without wind. So the extreme cold that we see here, say for instance the 10, 15 degree below 0 low temperatures that we've seen not that long ago, that's dangerous on its own, let alone with the wind chill factor. When you tack that on, we saw some 30, 40, almost 50 degree below 0 wind chills in the Northwoods, for example, 45 below almost at the National Weather Service office in Green Bay. That was measuring that at one point during the Friday morning hours during that extreme polar vortex event we had recently, and is also dangerous with or without winter precipitation. So the bitter cold air that we have, for instance, that's a hazard on its own. The winter weather, that's a hazard all on its own, and those can be classified separately and enhance the actual risk terminology. So it really emphasizes what risk is coming and what's the biggest risk if there's multiple ones occurring at the same time, and thus it gets a little bit more specific.
Thanks, Nolan. Before we go any further, let's take a second to talk about why it's so important to use our free WBAY First Alert Weather app. During the winter season, it has you covered anything from bright sunshine to a raging blizzard. If you scan the QR code on the left side of the screen there with your camera phone or your tablet, you can download our app for free. We send multiple videos out to this app every day. That way we keep you and your family ahead of any storm system. We tell you about the next weather maker. We help to keep you and your family weather ready. An hour-by-hour forecast 10 days into the future using First Alert, Viper Max, all the tools that you need to stay safe during the winter season is in our app. And when we adjust our forecast, those changes get sent right to the app even before they get updated on TV. So if you haven't tried it out, use our free WBAY First Alert weather app. Over to you, David.
Every winter storm system is different. Now, sometimes the only question we're really trying to answer as forecasters is how much snow is going to fall. But other times things are a bit more complicated than that, and that's what we're going to be talking about, are those more complicated situations, especially when you get into that mixed territory in between rain or snow. Before we dig into those details, let's cover some basics here about this setup. Now, we're going to assume that this is winter. That's what we're talking about. So higher up in the atmosphere aloft, everything is snow in these clouds. Now, typically, as you go higher up in the atmosphere, it does get colder with height. But that may not always be the case. Cold air is very dense, it's very heavy, and sometimes when warm air starts to ride in from the south, there can be a layer of colder air that hugs the ground. It might just be a few hundred feet thick, maybe it's a couple thousand feet thick, but it's as those two different types of air interact that we see these problems start to mount. Now, for the purposes of this demonstration, colder air means freezing or below. Warmer air means it's just above freezing. Doesn't have to be 50, 60, 70 degrees, something like that, just that it's above freezing. When the atmosphere is cold, all below 32 degrees, all you're going to get out of that is snowfall, assuming that there is snow at the appropriate level of the atmosphere. Now, even if you're starting out as snow aloft, as this falls through that warmer air, as long as it stays above freezing all the way down to the ground, then you're likely to get rainfall, but things get a little bit more complicated in between the two. So here's what is going on when we would get freezing rain. Now, freezing rain would also be considered ice. What will happen is you, again, start out with that snow aloft. That snow is going to fall through a large layer of warmer air. As it does so, that snow will melt 100%. So at some point, it's going to turn into just straight liquid water. It's not going to freeze back onto itself because water doesn't do that until you're around minus 40 degrees, and we're not talking about air that's quite that cold. So what happens is, even though it's falling through a shallow layer of air that is below freezing, it stays liquid. It's going to hit the ground as liquid, or your car, trees, power lines, anything else in liquid form. But because the temperature here is below 32 degrees, it is going to freeze rather quickly and put a glaze of ice on anything, and eventually that starts to accumulate, and you can add up 1, 2, 3/10 of an inch of ice, half an inch of ice, 3/4 of an inch, and the more ice you add, the heavier things get. Power lines fall, trees fall, roads become impassable, and so for that reason, freezing rain or ice would be the most dangerous of these winter weather types. So again, it's going to start as snow, fall through a large area of air where that temperature is above 32 degrees. The snow will completely melt. It strikes the ground as a liquid, but then pretty quickly freezes over and puts a glaze of ice on anything. If the ground were above freezing, well, then it's just rain. But if that ground is below freezing, again, you get ice starting to develop. Now, sleet would look like little ice pellets, almost like hail. It's formed differently, but that's what it is similar to. You would treat this almost like it were just a heavy wet snow as you're driving on it, so there are some benefits to getting the sleet versus the snowfall. Again, it's winter. We're starting off as snow up in the clouds. There's still some warm air above it, but that warm air is not as thick. It's not as wide as what we would get for freezing rain, so it's a very narrow band of air that's above 32 degrees. As that snow falls through it, it starts to melt, but it doesn't melt completely, so it's partially melted snow with some water on the outside. As that partially melted snowflake then reemerges back into the air that is below 32 degrees, the water that had formed will freeze back up onto the snowflake. Water doesn't freeze onto itself, but it will freeze onto snow. So as it refreezes, it will form an ice pellet. For snow to develop, it actually forms at very specific temperatures, snowflakes do, about 0 to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. So if the air is 25, 30 degrees, it's below freezing, but it's not an appropriate temperature for an ice crystal to form, so it just forms a small chunk of ice. That then hits the ground. It may bounce up. You can hear sleet falling, and it kind of has that tink, 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 tink sound to it. That is going to be, again, a partially melted snowflake that has then frozen back over, it hits the ground and again has the consistency of a heavy wet snowfall. So all winter weather is different, and when we get into those mixed types of precipitation, hopefully this helps clear things up. Freezing rain, ice are the same thing. Sleet is an ice pellet, but not quite the same thing as freezing rain.
Thanks, David. All right, let's take a deeper dive. A deeper dive into how this winter's gone so far, why it's gone this way, and what can we expect in the second half of winter and beyond. And what better thing to do than to bring our friends from the National Weather Service on board for a little fireside chat. Joining me right now is Kurt Kotenberg, Warning Coordinator with the Green Bay National Weather Service, to chat a little bit about the winter season. Kurt, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Steve. We really appreciate it.
Well, sure. It's our honor to have you on. And I'm curious, how are you and your colleagues faring out so far in the first half of winter?
Cold. We haven't had to go into hiding quite as extensively as I thought, but the past couple of weeks been getting a little dicey. So kind of starting off, we saw this pattern setting up in October, November, where there are really warm surface temperatures that went all the way up into the Gulf of Alaska. And this was a pattern that was reminiscent of the winter of 2013 to 2014. So in December of 2013, we had measurable snow in the Green Bay area for like 24 out of the 31 days. And I think that month ended up with like 30 some inches of snow. And then a really big, like, wham, cold weather event at the end of that. Yeah, that pattern played itself out. And then towards the end of January, as we know, it got quite cold. Below normal temperatures started January 18th. And if you string together January 18th, going to the rest of the month, it's probably going to be around top 5, top 10 coldest ends to the month of January.
So, Kurt, are you going to sell T-shirts out the back of your truck that say, "I survived the top 5 coldest late January, and all I got was this crummy T-shirt"?
Something like that, or parkas.
You know, if you look
something
back,
a little warmer.
Right. If you look back at December and January, it was basically either warmer than normal or colder than normal. In fact, we started off December colder than normal, and then you may recall as we got closer to Christmas, all of a sudden we were in a warmer than normal stretch. There really hasn't been a whole lot this winter where it's been seasonable. It's been up or down.
Yeah.
And you talk about the warm weather leading up to the Gulf of Alaska, but that is kind of on the flip side of the polar vortex, which has been kind of swirling in the eastern part of Canada. Maybe explain kind of like how we've been kind of oscillating right on the edge of that weather pattern through much of this season.
You know, overall, like the larger weather pattern, I feel like has been, kind of very, very swingy from like a strong El Nino, strong La Nina. Now we talk about El Nino, La Nina. So not only does, if you think of a line, like a 0 degree line, it's like not only does like, whether it's above it or below it matter, but the degree that it is above, the degree that is below. And so, we've been pretty high on the degrees over the past year, 2 years or so. And that has kind of led to the more, swingy kind of extreme type of weather. One way to view it is kind of like a tug of war between the La Nina, El Nino. And so when it goes neutral, it's kind of like the tug of war is taking a rest. Like, just calm down, we'll take a time out. So hopefully heading into 2026, we'll see, kind of more normal. We won't see as many big yo-yo up and down weather effects.
Sure.
And then lastly, too, I know you talked about the polar vortex. So, kind of a grander scheme of things, how does this all like phase in with one another? And so one way to view it is like the climate and the temperatures on the globe are very interconnected. So the El Nino, La Nina starts in the Pacific Ocean near the equator. And so if you have like an extreme warm temperatures near the equator, the Earth wants to drag those temperatures to help, kind of cool things down or spread things out.
If we are going to be pushing forward with a weaker El Nino, the tug of war is not going to be quite as extreme. It's going to be a lot more of a shorter rope, so to speak, right? A lesser tug back and forth. Are you saying that moving forward through the rest of winter into spring, that perhaps we're going to have something that's a little bit more seasonable and less in the way of extremes because of a shorter tug of rope, battle between La Nina and El Nino?
Yeah, that's probably a fair way to contextualize it. I mean, we're still going to have, I'm sure in March there'll probably be an 80-degree day. Just statistically that tends to happen. But yeah, we're not going to see as extreme. It's going to be 85, 90 degrees for a week. Then it's going to be 20 degrees for a week. Like, we're not going to see as much of a yo-yo effect.
The Climate Prediction Center, you guys are obviously very familiar with them. They have a 3-month outlook. If you look at February and March and April, and they're calling for above normal precipitation for Wisconsin, the Great Lakes. Maybe, if their outlook is correct, that could mean maybe a little more snow than normal. What is your take on that? Do you think that that's pretty much on par, or do you see a different variation of that?
It does seem like it's going to be a wet spring. Whether or not that means higher snowfall or higher rainfall, maybe both. That's what we'll iron out when we get into the day-to-day 7-day productivity. What I can say also is a big difference impact-wise when you have snow in March and April versus snow in January and December is on the roads. Pavement temperatures, when you start getting to March and April, it's very, very, very difficult during the daytime, even on a cloudy day, to have road temperatures that are below 32 degrees. And so oftentimes it could snow 8 inches, but literally that afternoon, like, the snow is melted off the roads. Even though we just got 8 inches of snow, which if we got 8 inches of snow in December, January, that's sticking. It's going to be cold.
Do you have any concerns beyond what we discussed as far as what might be something that people need to watch out for moving into the end of this winter and into spring?
What I tell people, if they ask me, what's the best thing I can do to keep myself and my family safe? And what I tell people is to start a habit. So every day, wake up, you're scrolling on your phone to see what, events happen in the world overnight. Take 30 seconds to look at the weather forecast for that upcoming day. 30, 60 seconds, wherever your most trusted weather source is, make sure it's a trusted one, like you all here at WBAY or the National Weather Service. Take that 30 to 60 seconds and just look at the weather forecast. And, too, if it's like a tornado day, people ask, if I'm in a car and a tornado's coming, what's the best thing I can do? I usually say, stop right there. The best thing you can do is to not put yourself in that situation in the first place. And so how do we do that? We do that by being weather aware. And that's where we really appreciate the partnership with WBAY and our media friends. We really work well together. We're sitting here analyzing the radar maps and, flying through all the model data and what we're seeing. But then you all help spread the message to keep people safe. And so, we're really working together for the common good of protecting life and property.
And that's what it's all about, folks. It's all about making sure that we work as a partnership to be able to keep people safe and to make good choices, especially when there's dangerous weather ahead. Kurt, I really appreciate the time today. Thanks for answering my questions. I know a lot of people are wondering what to expect as we go into the second half of winter and beyond, and I really appreciate your expertise, so thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Steve. Appreciate it.
A lot of people know that you were born and raised in Kentucky. I spent most of my life in Mississippi, so a couple years ago I moved to the Midwest, and it's a little bit of a culture shock to come back to the bitter cold. So this is your first Wisconsin winter. How you feeling?
It's colder than I would have even imagined. 22 below wind chills, what we had twice in 20-something years. And those were in the last 2 years, by the way, we had those. And now first time I've had 2 of these 30, 40 below wind chills. It eats through layers, I'm telling you.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. And I mean, what we've seen recently is pretty abnormal too. I think I've only had that maybe once a year for the last couple of years, but I feel like it really highlights the power of Midwestern winter. I know when I first moved here, what stressed me out more than anything was driving in the snow. It's a little bit of a learning curve. How are you feeling?
It almost feels like you're actually having to learn rally driving at the same time while keeping control. It's interesting balance. Like, can we just like start recruiting race drivers from out here more? Or maybe that's why we have champions here.
I mean, yeah, it is a little bit of a challenge. I feel like it's always, for me, it's always the most humbling whenever you have to dig your car out of a parking lot or dig your car out of a driveway. Have you ever had any instances like that so far?
Thankfully, no. Where I am, they clean it out pretty decently in the morning. It's just the fact you got to deal with some of the more non-treated areas that can really throw your traction off instantly, even if you have dry tires off the start.
So what has been the most surprising thing about Wisconsin to you so far?
A lot of it is the amount of snow.
Yeah.
Normally we get around 2, 3, 4 inches as a big snow back home. That's literally what we call big snow. And even recently, these big snowstorms that we've been mentioning, that's a big one for them. Biggest in about 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
So for us to get in these 6, 8, 10 inch totals, I know we haven't had a really big snow up here yet by you guys' standards, but it's decent enough for me to really take notice.
Yeah, and I feel like 2 to 4 inches is that's just Tuesday here. You know, that's just a regular day, regular snowfall.
And they clear roads off like it's nothing up here too. It's easy to get down them. And compared to home, you would actually have to go 5 miles an hour on the secondary roads just to get somewhere.
Yeah, and here it's like, give it a couple hours and it's good as new.
Yep, right in the morning hours and you're set.
So, would you rather have Wisconsin winter, the coldest Wisconsin winter, or the hottest Kentucky summer?
Easy, coldest winter.
Really?
Back home, let me tell you, this story here, the dew points up here, I think when I got up here, they couldn't get over, 60, 65 most times. That's what we call very humid back home. And when you get these 90-degree temperatures with those dew points on top of it, puts those heat index values at about 105, combined with that steamy, dense feel. It's just not good, especially if you're sweating in the afternoon with the heat.
Yeah, I am totally there with you. I do not miss the Mississippi heat at all. I also always say that the snow makes the cold worth it, and I think up here it's super cold, but you have the snow to show for it.
Exactly that. It happens more often, but although it gets colder for a few times, like this time of the year, I think I've heard is probably the coldest at this point, so we should be on the upswing, thankfully.
Yeah, well, thanks for chatting with me out here in the freezing cold. Let's go back inside.
Let's warm up.
Thanks, Emily. Thanks, Nolan. Okay, we would be remiss if we didn't mention this. It's February 2nd. It's Groundhog Day. Are you familiar with the folklore? So on this date, the groundhog comes out of his burrow, and if he sees his shadow, that means 6 more weeks of winter. But if he doesn't see his shadow, it means that we get an early spring. That's if you believe in the folklore. So we had some groundhogs that came out this morning, and despite cloudy skies, both in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin and Puxatawny, Pennsylvania, we had different forecasts. Sun Prairie Jimmy did not see a shadow this morning, and he's saying there's going to be an early spring across the Badger State. We'll see. Meanwhile, out east in Puxatawny, Phil, just with the cloudy sky, apparently did see a shadow, and that means 6 extra weeks of winter. But you know what? These two groundhogs don't have the same accuracy levels. In fact, according to NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, Sun Prairie Jimmy is more accurate based on past years and climate data, with a 60% accuracy rate compared to Puxatawny Phil, who's only 35% accurate. Take that for what you will as we move through the rest of this winter season. And I think right there we need to put a bow on this winter halftime report. Thanks for watching over the past half hour. Moving forward through the rest of this winter season, don't forget, we are always there for you and your family on all the WBAY platforms, including on WBAY.com, our First Alert weather app, and our 24/7 weather channel. We will first alert you to all the little changes that are coming in the forecast and give you the lowdown on the next big weather maker that's going to impact you and your family as we go through the rest of the winter season. On behalf of all the First Alert meteorologists, thanks for spending some time with us. We hope you stay with us through the rest of the season and have a great evening.